The early morning sun bathed the cracked asphalt of the old basketball court in the Cabrini Green projects. 16-year-old Tommy Reeves dribbled his worn-out basketball, the sound echoing through the quiet neighborhood. This wasn't just a game to Tommy. It was his escape, his passion, his chance to rise above the hardships of his surroundings. Despite his torn sneakers and the rusted hoop, he believed that this court held his future. Tommy had always dreamed bigger than the confines of his neighborhood, imagining himself on grander stages, playing among the basketball legends. Today, with Jamal Morris, the NBA superstar, visiting the Wilson Community Center nearby, a thought sparked in Tommy's mind. What if I could challenge him? He wasn't interested in autographs or being just another face in the crowd. No, Tommy was going to challenge Jamal Morris to a one-on-one game, aiming for something far greater than fame. He wanted to change his life and his community. With one determined whisper, "This is my shot," Tommy made the decision that would alter everything. His challenge had begun, and it would light a fire in him that would burn brighter than ever. Tommy's heart raced as he stood in the line outside the Wilson Community Center. The crowd stretched for blocks, all eager to catch a glimpse of Jamal Morris, the basketball legend who had inspired millions with his soaring dunks and clutch plays. Everyone around Tommy was wearing their fresh jerseys, their Air Jordans, their perfect smiles. They looked the part, people who belonged. But Tommy, he stood out, not because of his worn sneakers or faded clothes, but because he was carrying something far more valuable than any jersey or pair of shoes. A dream. And it was a dream that no one in the crowd could see, but him. As the line moved forward, Tommy's mind was swirling. He had come here with one goal in mind. Not to get an autograph, not to shake hands, but to challenge Jamal Morris. The idea had been growing in his mind all morning, fueled by the fire that had burned inside him for years. Tommy wasn't here to be a passive observer of greatness. He wanted to be a part of it. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the worn basketball card of Jamal Morris in his pocket. The card, creased from years of handling, was his most prized possession. It wasn't just a card. It was a symbol of everything he aspired to. When the moment arrived, Tommy stepped forward. Jamal Morris was sitting at a table, signing autographs, surrounded by flashing cameras and excited fans. Tommy's breath caught in his throat, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. The words came out, surprising even him, but they felt so right. "Mr. Morris," he said, his voice shaking at first but then steadying, "I challenge you to a game of one-on-one." The room went silent. The air seemed to freeze. The laughter that followed was a nervous, unsure sound, and Tommy's heart hammered in his chest. But Jamal Morris didn't laugh. Instead, he studied Tommy closely, taking in his worn-out shoes, his determination, his youth. Something shifted in Jamal's expression. Respect, perhaps. Or maybe it was recognition. "What happens if you win?" Jamal asked, leaning forward, his voice soft but curious. Tommy had never thought that far ahead, but in that moment his response came without hesitation. "If I win, you help my community get a real basketball court, one with nets, one without cracks." The room stirred with disbelief, some people laughing, others unsure how to react. But Jamal Morris raised his hand, silencing the crowd. He leaned in closer to Tommy, his eyes locked on his with an intensity that Tommy would never forget. "That's a serious challenge," Jamal said, his voice now filled with something deeper. Respect, maybe even admiration. "Most kids just want an autograph." "I'm not like most kids," Tommy replied, his voice trembling but unwavering. In that moment, something passed between them, a recognition that went beyond just basketball. Tommy had made a choice that day, a choice to step out of the shadows of his neighborhood, to rise above the challenges that had been placed in his path. He wasn't asking for a favor, he was demanding a chance. And for the first time, Jamal Morris didn't see just a kid from the projects. He saw someone with a vision, someone with the courage to chase a dream, no matter how impossible it seemed. The challenge wasn't just about basketball. It was about hope. It was about giving a young boy, and his entire community, something to believe in, something that might just change everything. And in that brief exchange, Tommy realized that this wasn't just a game. It was a turning point in his life, a moment that would define everything to come. The walk back to the apartment felt like a blur. Tommy's mind was racing, his heart still pounding from the challenge he had just laid at Jamal Morris's feet. The weight of what he had just done was sinking in, and he couldn't quite believe it himself. But there was one thing he knew for sure. This was no longer just about basketball. It was about hope. It was about daring to believe that something bigger was possible, that his life could be more than the streets he had grown up on. He had put everything on the line with one simple act, a challenge that could either make him a hero or a fool. As Tommy approached his building, his stomach tightened. He could already hear his grandmother's voice in his head, the way she would gently scold him with that mix of love and concern. Eleanor Reeves had always been the pillar of his world, the one person who had loved him unconditionally after his father's death. She had raised him with the belief that education was the key to a better life, that no matter the circumstances, you had to keep pushing forward. But Tommy knew he had just defied her teachings. He opened the door to their small apartment where Eleanor was already at the kitchen counter preparing dinner. The aroma of fried chicken filled the air, familiar and comforting, yet Tommy couldn't shake the knot in his stomach. His grandmother looked up when he entered, her brow furrowed in that way that told him she knew something was off. "You skipped school today, didn't you?" she asked quietly, the tone in her voice not angry but filled with the disappointment he hated to see. Tommy hesitated, guilt weighing heavily on him. He didn't want to lie, but he didn't know how to explain what he had done. How could he tell her that he had skipped school to chase a dream, to challenge a basketball legend? It sounded absurd even to him, but when he looked into his grandmother's eyes, the love and concern there softened the harshness of the truth. "I had to, Grandma," he finally said, his voice small. "Jamal Morris was here. I had to do it." Eleanor sighed, placing the spatula down and turning to face him fully. Her eyes softened as she took in his serious expression. She knew what he had done wasn't just impulsive. She had seen the way his eyes lit up when he spoke about basketball, the way he practiced every day, long after most kids had gone home. She had seen the same spark in his father, the same desire to escape, to rise above. "You remind me so much of your father," Eleanor said quietly, the words carrying a weight that Tommy wasn't prepared for. "He had that same fire in him. He dreamed big, just like you." Tommy swallowed hard. His father, whom he barely remembered, had been a basketball player too, back when he was alive. Everyone had said he was good enough to make it to the pros, but he had chosen family over fame. Tommy had always wondered what his father would have been like had he been given the chance to follow his own dream. Now Tommy was beginning to see that his father's choice might not have been a sacrifice at all. It had been an investment in something greater. "You think he would have been proud of me?" Tommy asked, his voice barely a whisper. Eleanor paused for a moment, and when she spoke again it was with a certainty that gave Tommy strength. "Your father would have been proud of you no matter what. He would have seen this fire in you, the same drive he had. But he would have wanted you to remember something. Your education comes first. Don't forget that." Tommy nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle into his heart. He knew she was right. The balance between dreams and reality was delicate. It wasn't enough to simply chase something. You had to have a foundation, something to fall back on when the dream seemed out of reach. But as he looked at his grandmother, the love and pride in her eyes spoke volumes. She wasn't angry with him. She was proud of his courage, proud of the way he had stepped out of the shadows and demanded something more for himself, for their community. "Grandma," Tommy said, the resolve in his voice stronger now, "I know I made a mistake today, but I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep practicing. I'm going to make that court better for all of us. I promise." Eleanor smiled softly, reaching over to touch his arm. "I know you will, child. Just remember that you're never alone in this. We'll get there together." And for the first time, Tommy believed it. He had taken the first step towards something bigger than himself. The challenge wasn't over. It was only just beginning. But now, he knew he wasn't just doing it for himself. He was doing it for his father, for his grandmother, for the kids in his community who had never been given a shot at greatness. This was no longer just about basketball. It was about building something that would last, something that would change everything. Tommy walked home that day feeling like he had stepped into a new world. The challenge had been made, the words spoken, but the true weight of it was still sinking in. It wasn't just about what had happened in that community center. It was about what it had set into motion. Something had shifted, not only inside him, but in the very fabric of his community. He could feel the ripple of that challenge vibrating through the streets, and though he hadn't realized it at the time, his bold decision was about to change everything. Word spread quickly. In the close-knit corridors of Cabrini Green, stories like his didn't happen every day. Kids on the block gathered in small groups, their voices rising in disbelief and awe as they discussed Tommy's audacity. At first, some laughed. Others thought it was a joke, a wild fantasy. How could a kid from this neighborhood possibly challenge a basketball legend, let alone win? But Tommy wasn't just a kid from the projects anymore. He was the boy who had dared to dream bigger than anyone had thought possible. That evening, as Tommy returned home, the familiar sight of his best friend Marcus sitting on the stoop greeted him. His eyes widened as soon as he saw Tommy. The moment Marcus had heard about Tommy's challenge, he had been in disbelief, just like everyone else. But now, seeing Tommy standing in front of him, something was different. Marcus didn't laugh. Instead, he just stared at him, as if seeing him for the first time. "You really did it," Marcus said, shaking his head in admiration. "You actually went up to him and said it. You challenged Jamal Morris." Tommy nodded, the excitement still bubbling inside him, but now there was a sense of calm, of certainty. "Yeah, I did. I had to. For all of us." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The streets around them, so often filled with the noise of everyday life, seemed to quiet down as the reality of what Tommy had done settled in. Marcus looked at Tommy, his expression slowly changing from disbelief to something more profound. In that moment, Marcus wasn't just seeing a friend. He was seeing the spark of change. The courage that had awakened something in Tommy, something that now touched everyone in their circle. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, his voice quiet. Tommy paused, staring at the ground as he thought about it. "I don't know," he said slowly. "But I feel like it's bigger than just me. I feel like something's going to happen. People are going to see us differently." And they did. The news of Tommy's challenge spread throughout the community, from the older kids to the adults. Conversations began to shift. The residents of Cabrini Green, who had long been overlooked, who had grown used to the feeling of being invisible, started to feel something new. They began to see themselves through Tommy's eyes, not as forgotten, not as a community bound by struggle, but as a place where dreams could come true. The challenge Tommy had made, the sheer audacity to stand up and demand something more, was something they had never expected, yet something they couldn't ignore. By the next day, the air in the community felt different. Tommy's friends, including Marcus, started practicing harder on the courts, pushing each other to become better, not just at basketball, but at believing in themselves. The community began to rally around the idea of a new basketball court, something that could unite them, something that could stand as a testament to their resilience. No longer was it just a dilapidated court with a crooked rim. It was the birthplace of change, the place where a kid had dared to dream beyond the ordinary and had ignited something in everyone around him. And though Tommy didn't yet realize it, his bold move was becoming a turning point for more than just the basketball court. It was sparking a shift in the very hearts of his community. People started talking about the future in a new way, as if anything at all was possible if they just dared to believe. The ripple effect wasn't just about basketball, it was about hope, about breaking through the barriers that had long kept them confined to the margins of society. It was about seeing themselves as more than the limits they had been given, about realizing that they had the power to shape their future. In the days that followed, Tommy's challenge became a symbol, not just of ambition, but of the possibility for transformation. His courage to reach beyond his circumstances was reminding everyone around him that dreams were not limited to the privileged. Dreams were for everyone, especially those who dared to challenge the impossible. And the ripples of that challenge would continue to spread, touching lives in ways Tommy couldn't yet comprehend. 2 weeks passed, but Tommy couldn't shake the feeling of anticipation that hung over him like a heavy cloud. Each day that went by without hearing from Jamal Morris felt like a lifetime. The story of his challenge had begun to fade into the background of daily life. The excitement had dulled, replaced by the reality of his grounded status and the routine of schoolwork. Still, Tommy clung to the hope that his challenge hadn't been in vain. He wore his father's old wristband every day, hidden beneath the sleeve of his shirt, as a reminder of what he was fighting for. Not just for himself, but for everyone in his community who had never been given a real shot at greatness. His friends, including Marcus, had continued to practice on the old court. The basketball hoop with its crooked frame and broken net became a place where they pushed each other to become better, not just at basketball, but at life. Every shot they took felt like a step closer to something bigger, something more. But deep inside, Tommy couldn't shake the doubt. What if Jamal Morris had forgotten about him? What if the challenge had been too outrageous, too audacious to be taken seriously? But then, one afternoon, the phone rang. Tommy's grandmother, Eleanor, was in the kitchen when the call came through. At first, Tommy didn't recognize the number, but his heart skipped a beat when the voice on the other end spoke. "Is this Tommy Reeves?" the voice asked. "Yes, speaking," Tommy replied, trying to keep his voice steady, though the excitement was practically bursting out of him. "This is Jamal Morris's team," the voice said. "We've heard about your challenge and we're reaching out. Jamal's agreed to meet with you." Tommy's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced, and for a moment it felt as if time had stopped. Was this really happening? He had done it. He had actually caught the attention of Jamal Morris. He had dared to dream. And somehow, that dream was starting to become a reality. The voice continued, "Jamal was impressed by your courage and determination. He believes in what you're doing for your community. He's agreed to meet you and discuss the next steps. We'll be in touch soon to set it all up." Tommy could barely process the words. He felt his hands tremble as he held the phone, staring at the same faded basketball card of Jamal Morris that he had carried with him for years. The boy who had once been invisible, who had spent his days practicing on a broken court, was now about to meet the very man who had inspired him to believe in something greater. As Tommy hung up the phone, he turned to see his grandmother standing in the doorway. Her expression was a mix of pride and disbelief. Eleanor had always believed in Tommy's potential, but even she hadn't fully understood the scope of his dreams. Now, as she saw the joy and wonder in his eyes, she realized that this was more than just a phone call. It was a turning point in their lives. It was a moment that proved dreams weren't reserved for the lucky few. They were for anyone who dared to reach for them. "You did it, Tommy," Eleanor said, her voice filled with a softness that only a grandmother could convey. "You showed him. You showed us all that if you believe hard enough, anything is possible." Tommy nodded, unable to speak for a moment, overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. "It's not over yet, Grandma. This is just the beginning." And it was. The phone call had set into motion a series of events that Tommy could never have imagined. The challenge he had made, the boldness that had once seemed like a fool's errand, had become a turning point in his life and the life of his community. Jamal Morris, the legend, had heard him. He had acknowledged him, and now he was willing to help. That promise, Jamal's promise to meet with him to help make a difference in his community, was more than just a chance to meet a basketball star. It was a testament to the power of believing in something bigger than yourself, to the power of challenging the status quo and fighting for change. For Tommy, it was proof that when you stand up and challenge the world, sometimes the world answers back, and when it does, it has the power to change everything. The day Jamal Morris arrived at the Wilson Community Center to meet Tommy was one that would be etched in the memory of every person who lived in Cabrini Green. It wasn't just another event, not just another moment of fleeting excitement. It was a turning point. The promise Jamal had made, to stand beside Tommy and help bring a new basketball court to their neighborhood, had become more than a personal victory for one boy. It had become a collective triumph for the entire community. When Jamal Morris stepped onto the cracked court, he wasn't just walking into a space filled with basketball fans and kids who admired him. He was stepping into a place that had long been overlooked, a place that had been forgotten by the world. The court, more of a symbol of neglect than a place of recreation, had always been the heart of the neighborhood. It had been where kids came to escape, to dream, and to bond. But the cracks in the pavement and the rusted hoop were more than just signs of wear. They were the physical representation of the neglect and hardship that had plagued this community for years. Yet, in the eyes of the residents, it was theirs. It was the only thing they had, and they loved it despite its flaws. When Jamal arrived, the atmosphere was different. There was a tangible sense of hope in the air, something that hadn't existed in the neighborhood for as long as anyone could remember. Tommy stood near the sideline, watching Jamal walk toward him. For a moment, it was hard to believe that this was real, that the man who had inspired his every move, the one he had challenged without hesitation, was standing right there in front of him. "Tommy, you've done something incredible," Jamal said, smiling as he shook Tommy's hand. His eyes held a mixture of respect and admiration, something Tommy had never thought he would earn from a man like Jamal. "Not many people have the courage to step up like you did. You've inspired more than just your community. You've inspired me." Tommy felt a lump form in his throat. He had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it was here, it felt even more significant than he had anticipated. Jamal wasn't just acknowledging his boldness. He was validating everything Tommy had believed about the power of dreams. For the first time, Tommy truly understood that sometimes all it took was one person to spark a change, one moment of bravery, one act of defiance against the odds. As Jamal stood at the center of the court talking with the community members, he wasn't just giving a speech or offering empty promises. He was making a commitment, a real, tangible commitment, to rebuild the court. The conversation shifted from uncertainty to action, as Jamal spoke about the plans to create a new, fully equipped basketball court that would not only be a place for play, but a symbol of opportunity, of something more for the kids in the neighborhood. As the residents gathered, their faces lit up with disbelief and joy. The kids who had spent their entire lives playing on cracked pavement now saw a future where they could actually practice their game on a real court. The adults, many of whom had long given up on the idea of change, began to feel a renewed sense of purpose. Jamal Morris wasn't just a celebrity who came for a visit. He was someone who had made their dreams his own. For Tommy, this was more than just a new basketball court. It was the confirmation of everything he had hoped for, everything he had believed in. He had never imagined that his challenge, his audacity, would lead to this, a transformation of not only the court but of the entire community's mindset. They were no longer a forgotten corner of the city. They were a community that mattered. They were a community capable of achieving greatness. That day, as Jamal Morris left the court, the sound of basketballs bouncing on the newly built court echoed louder than ever. It wasn't just the sound of play, it was the sound of possibilities, of futures being rewritten, of kids seeing that their dreams were no longer bound by the limits of their neighborhood. For the first time in a long while, the people of Cabrini Green saw themselves as more than their circumstances. They saw themselves as a community worthy of hope, worthy of change, and worthy of greatness. Tommy had changed everything, not just for himself, but for everyone. His challenge had sparked the beginning of something new. And though the road ahead would still be difficult, the promise of a better future was now within reach. The power of one voice, one challenge had transformed a community. And it all started with Tommy Reeves, the boy who dared to believe. As the months passed, life began to shift in subtle yet profound ways for Tommy. What had begun as a single challenge to an NBA legend had snowballed into something far greater than he had ever imagined. The rebuilt basketball court at Wilson Community Center wasn't just a symbol of physical transformation. It was a testament to the power of courage, hope, and the unwavering belief that one person could spark change. For Tommy, the journey wasn't over. It wasn't just about the court anymore. It was about what the court represented. A new beginning, a fresh sense of pride in a place that had long been overlooked. And it was about showing the next generation that they, too, could rise above their circumstances. Tommy, now a local hero, didn't just stop playing on the new court. He became a mentor to the younger kids in the neighborhood. He taught them how to play, sure, but more importantly, he taught them how to dream. Each day after school, Tommy would walk to the court, the sounds of kids laughing and shouting filling the air. It was a sound that had once seemed impossible in a place like Cabrini Green, a sound that now seemed to echo the promise of a brighter future. The kids looked up to him, not just because of his skills on the court, but because they saw in him something they hadn't seen before. A path to something greater. When they asked him how he had done it, how he had stood before Jamal Morris and challenged him, Tommy's answer was simple. I just believed, he would say, and I didn't let anyone tell me it wasn't possible. Tommy had come to realize something profound. The challenge he had made wasn't just about basketball. It was about defying the limitations others had placed on him and his community. It was about refusing to accept the narrative that people like him were destined to remain stuck in a cycle of poverty, violence, and neglect. It was about understanding that change didn't happen because you waited for it to come. It happened when you stood up and demanded it, even when the world around you seemed to tell you it wasn't possible. As time went on, Tommy's message spread. People from all over the city and even beyond came to visit the newly built court, eager to see the place where a young boy had made a challenge that changed everything. Some came to play, others came to witness the power of a dream realized. Tommy didn't just leave a legacy on the court itself. He left a legacy in the hearts of the people around him. One afternoon, as he sat on the sidelines watching a game unfold, Marcus Hodds, his lifelong friend, sat beside him. "You know, you're kind of like the new face of Cabrini Green," Marcus said, his voice filled with admiration. "You've shown us all what's possible." Tommy nodded, but there was no arrogance in his expression. "I didn't do it alone," he said quietly. "None of this would have happened without the people here. My family, my friends, my community. This is for all of us." And that's when it hit Tommy, in a way that it hadn't before. He hadn't just changed his own life. He had changed the lives of everyone around him. He had reminded them that their worth wasn't defined by the brokenness around them, that their potential was limitless, regardless of where they came from or what others thought of them. Tommy had become a symbol of hope, not just in Cabrini Green, but in every neighborhood like it. He had shown the world that courage wasn't just about taking big steps. It was about believing in something better, and then taking the first step, no matter how impossible it seemed. His legacy wasn't just the court or the recognition he had received from Jamal Morris. It was the countless kids who now dreamed bigger, the families who saw a chance for something more, and the community that had rediscovered its strength. Tommy had changed the narrative, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt invisible. He had proven that no dream was too big, no challenge too daunting, and no person too small to make a difference. And as he stood on the sidelines watching the game unfold before him, Tommy realized that this was just the beginning. His legacy, the courage he had shown, would live on in the hearts of everyone who dared to believe that they, too, could change their world. As Tommy stood watching the game unfold before him, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not just for the community, but for everyone who had believed in the impossible. And just like that, Tommy realized that his story was only beginning, and so was the impact it would have on others. If Tommy's journey has inspired you, if you believe in the power of dreams and the courage to challenge the impossible, we want to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story of transformation, hope, and perseverance. Comment below and share how you're challenging your own limits and making a difference in your own world. Let's keep the conversation going and continue to inspire one another. Together, we can change everything.